What's up, investors? Here's the Russian dude. For months, Russia's fuel crisis looked like another problem the Kremlin could push into ordinary people while protecting the one system Vladimir Putin values about everything else. Because gas stations in Moscow, St. Petersburg could face shortages, public transport could even suffer, farmers could struggle during the harvesting campaign, and grocery supply chains could become more expensive, but the active military was supposed to remain protected no matter what. Since fuel at the front is not a luxury, it is a transport, communication, surveillance, and just basic daily survival. Yet, a recent investigation by Bureaucracy suggests that even this protected circle is beginning to crack completely. Journalists interviewed at least 10 Russian service members about fuel availability, and 7 of them described the gasoline situation as a complete disaster, with some units receiving only 20 liters per day or less for the entire unit, while on certain days nothing arrived at all, and even the quality of the fuel was questionable. In some locations, shortages became serious enough that deliveries of food, water, and fuel itself could not be guaranteed, forcing soldiers to walk as far as 10 kilometers just for resupply. The real question is not whether Russia still possesses gasoline, because, well, it obviously does. And it's not whether the Kremlin officially prioritizes the military, because, well, once again, it clearly does. But whether the Russian state can move that fuel through bureaucracy, corruption, drone surveillance, and a collapsing last-mile so-called delivery network, all the way to the people who really, quote-unquote, need it. That is where this story becomes much bigger than an empty tank, because it reveals the difference between resources that exist on paper and power that can still be used in reality. That gap between declared priority and practical delivery is the central weakness exposed by every example in today's story. Before we proceed, guys, just a quick mention of our Patreon. There is a free trial currently, so if you ever wanted to try it, now it's literally the best time, the perfect time, no commitment at all. And one of the best benefits is the additional chapter at the end of each episode and completely ad-free videos. The link to our Patreon is down below. Thanks so much. Now let's begin. Imagine this. A soldier may still have orders and equipment, but when the generator stops, an entire position begins losing its senses one battery at a time. Because modern frontline infantry depends on electricity for almost everything. And that electricity usually comes from gasoline-powered generators in trenches that are not connected to any power grid. Military-grade encrypted radios may hold a charge for only a couple of hours before they need to be charged. So without electricity, a unit can literally lose contact with senior officers, artillery, backup forces, evacuation crews, everyone. While assault groups may not even be able to coordinate themselves and their own movements safely. The same generators charge drone detectors, night vision equipment, mapping and navigation tablets, tactical hearing protection headsets, once again everything. While radar systems that detect incoming drones activate electronic warfare jammers against Mavic quadcopters, and those jammers, guess what? They also need regular charging. Even ordinary trench life depends on gasoline, because drainage systems use electric pumps, lighting is needed to treat injured soldiers, inspect and reload equipment also needs to be in lit room, boil water, hot meals, phones, tablets that carry maps, coordinates and updated information, everything. Fuel is therefore not simply about just driving one truck from A to Z, but about keeping an entire network of machines alive. That is why frontline shortages seemed almost impossible, even when civilian pumps are already struggling, because the government could sacrifice public convenience, public transit, or parts of the harvesting campaign, but it could not leave active military units without power. Another media, Russian one, Kommersant, reinforced this belief on July 21st, when it published details from a meeting chaired by Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak about these official fuel priorities. Gas stations were near empty, while Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk regions, Kaliningrad region received special attention as expected. Agricultural producers, Russian railways, and the commercial fleet ranked higher, and defense contractors supporting the war effort stood at the very top. Makes sense. On paper, the state was doing exactly what wartime logic demanded, yet the testimony from the front shows that the problem begins after the priority is announced, because the government order does not guarantee that gasoline will survive every stage of the journey to a trench. The first evidence of that failure came not from Moscow, but from the same pro-war communities that normally insist that the system is working. Here's what you might not expect. The easiest way to confirm that the Russian military lacks something is often to watch what supporters suddenly begin collecting money for. Because once official supply chain channels fail, Telegram activists, military bloggers, relatives, and volunteer networks step in to purchase what the state claims is already available. So as an example, Versko found posts announcing purchase of 1,700 or even 270 at least liters of fuel, while one supporter reportedly siphoned 10 liters of gasoline from a private vehicle for combatants near Kherson, and other messages describing soldiers paying from their own pockets even when volunteers delivered the fuel. Some appeals asked people to bring full cans of fuel, while others requested diesel generators because diesel remains somewhat easier to obtain than gasoline. One video from a humanitarian mission in Dokmak in the Zaporizhia region described volunteers carrying 1,000 liters of gasoline together with 1.5 million rubles in cash, while explaining that shortages were preventing units from carrying out missions and evacuating injured soldiers. This was not presented as an unusual one-day disruption, but as a response requested by the troops themselves. War blogger Vladimir Romanov claimed that Donetsk region was out of fuel and that purchase limits stretched all the way between the DPR, Donetsk People's Republic, and Rostov-on-Don. According to his account, one unit sent vehicles to obtain gasoline using soldiers' own money, but stations across the Rostov region refused to let them fill barrels intended for the combat zone. Another pro-war influencer confronted gas station staff who were enforcing rationing orders and refusing military customers permission to fill the cans, arguing that the fuel was meant for air defense teams and frontline units. His anger was, at least according to the Russian pro-Russian supporters, his anger was understandable, but the employees were following just simple management instructions, exposing the total absurdity at the center of the crisis, which is that the government that says that the military has priority, while the civilian system controlling the pumps is ordered to ration everyone else. The fundraising messages became increasingly direct, with one saying that fuel had been a concern since the previous summer, and that the bill for a single unit now began at 50,000 rubles, while another one told travelers that 20 liters of gasoline would be more useful than 2 crates of cookies. A separate appeal requested 2 diesel generators and admitted that gasoline disruptions were already affecting the military, although diesel shortages were described as at least less severe. Some military bloggers even joked that battalions might need samovare, this called term for small modular crude distillation units or mini refineries, echoing improvised fuel production seen in Chechnya more than 20 years ago. The joke was absurd, but the situation behind it was extremely serious, because supporters of an energy superpower were discussing whether units should refine their own gasoline themselves. But these fundraisers do more than prove that the fuel is missing, because they reveal why military priority fails when the army depends on equipment that officially does not even belong to it. Let's talk about it now. There is a twist to this entire story. The Russian military may receive fuel for everything listed in its official records, while still leaving the real unit unable to function, because much of the equipment used every day was purchased by soldiers or volunteers and therefore does not exist inside the bureaucracy calculating fuel rations. How about that? Before the shortage, commanding officers could request enough gasoline for official vehicles as well as generators and privately acquired machines. But as supplies tightened, that flexibility largely disappeared and consumption had to be justified through documented equipment lists. The Russian is now based on registered vehicles, which sounds logical until once again we remember that more than 4 years into this war, many Russian units still rely on private or volunteer-funded systems for tasks that the defense ministry should have covered otherwise. I mean, major machines, such as battle tanks are obviously recorded, but drones, generators, pickup trucks, ATVs, electronic warfare systems may not be, while even body armor, helmets and other tactical gear have frequently been purchased by service members, relatives and pro-war groups. Procurement remains too limited, so volunteers fill the gap. Yet, once gasoline becomes scarce, the bureaucracy can refuse to support the same machines that keeps these units operating. A privately purchased item can be added to the military register, but then it becomes state property and may be redistributed by senior officers. Soldiers, as a result, face a pretty terrible for them choice. keep a generator or vehicle unofficial and pay for the fuel personally, or register it, lose control over it, and risk watching it disappear through the command structure that failed to provide one and end up being in the pockets of your own generals. A message published on behalf of a member of the BAR's Belgrade counter-drone unit described this exact problem, explaining that many vehicles used by mobile air defense teams had been bought by volunteers and were not formally therefore listed. Since the defense minister did not recognize them, it did not supply their fuel, so operators had to visit civilian stations and pay themselves. Until recently, Tiboil and Tatneft had allowed the unit to fill the canisters. These are one of the major gas stations in Russia. But according to the message, even that access ended after regional restrictions were introduced. This example was not from the deepest frontline position, yet it showed the same structural failure, because military priority applies only when the system agrees that the vehicle is military and that, once again, it exists on paper. A volunteer-bought pickup truck carrying an air defense team becomes just an ordinary civilian customer the moment it reaches a commercial pump, even though that team may be protecting roads, depots, rear areas, even the pump itself, and supply convoys from drones, pretty much everyone. The Russian army has built a parallel logistics network out of donated drones, volunteer vans, private generators, and soldiers' own money, allowing the state to hide procurement failures for years. But once gasoline itself became scarce, every unofficial solution began competing at the same civilian pump. And still, paperwork explains only part of the shortage, because even fuel that officially enters the military system can be diverted or lost before it even reaches the final unit. And this is where an old Russian problem collides with a completely new battlefield. Now here is where things get really tricky. Russia's frontline fuel crisis is being driven by two forces that strengthen one another, because corruption removes gasoline from the supply chain on the inside, while Ukrainian drones make deliveries slower, more dangerous, and less predictable from the outside. According to service members once again interviewed by Verstka, soldiers were not only buying fuel from locals at extreme prices and doing so themselves, but military gasoline and diesel were also being resold, with one account claiming that tons of POL, meaning petroleum, oil and lubricants, had been taken and sold for as much as 350 rubles per liter. Reports carrying headlines such as "Service member steals 10 tons of diesel fuel" points to the very, once again, same pattern. And in a system this large, even a small share diverted at each stage can become a major shortage by the time supplies actually reach the front line. And just think about it, the battlefield provides convenient cover, because tanker trucks, depots and vehicles are genuinely being struck or damaged, allowing fuel to be removed from official records under circumstances that are very difficult to verify. When a shipment disappears, commanders can blame drones, bad roads or emergency rerouting, and some explanations will come true. But the same chaos also gives dishonest officers room to sell what was purchased for the army. This leads to the so-called last mile problem, a phrase used in civilian delivery services for the final stage between a warehouse and a customer, where traffic, bad weather, or even just a broken intercom or a heavily or hardly accessible building can ruin an otherwise successful shipment. Just last part of it. In war, that last mile is the space closest to surveillance drones and precision weapons, searching for vehicles that cannot hide their purpose. In earlier conflicts, large fuel and ammunition depots could sit near railway hubs 40 to 50 kilometers behind the front and remain reasonably protected. But that model began collapsing in 2022, when Ukraine started targeting nearby Russian supply centers. Today, drones can reach targets thousands of kilometers away, while shorter-range drones watch roads, intersections, and unloading points much closer to the front line. People once assumed that firing a single HIMARS missile at a single truck would be just unjustifiably and prohibitively expensive. But now cheaper drones have changed the calculation by searching for tankers, following vehicles, and striking transport on exposed routes. Open source researchers have documented hundreds of attacks on vehicles in Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine during recent months alone, and those are only the instances uploaded online. The biggest shift came in May and June 2026, when the effective range of Ukrainian frontline strikes expanded beyond 50 kilometers after previously concentrating within roughly 5 to 10 kilometers. That change happened quickly, and the old definition of a safe rear area is becoming obsolete as both sides produce more drones and widen the territory where any moving vehicle can be detected. The result is a broad contested drone danger zone, separating depots from frontline troops. Fuel has to travel further in smaller quantities now, use less predictable routes, transfer between several vehicles, and sometimes even complete the final stretch by hand, literally, increasing obviously delays before corruption or civilian rationing is even considered. One pro-war channel described a route beginning in Voronezh and ending with off-road van drivers, ATV operators, mobile air defense teams covering the red zone, and then soldiers finally carrying fuel, batteries and ammunition on foot while avoiding drones. Gasoline may therefore exist in Voronezh and still be practically unavailable to a unit literally next to them near the front line. And once the final link depends on thousands of drivers deciding whether to enter that dangerous area, Moscow's priority list loses much of their power, because an order signed at the very top cannot make a driver just be less afraid, cannot stop a drone for watching an intersection, or prevent an officer from diverting part of the load into his pocket. Russia still possesses vast resources, but the path between possession and use has become much longer, more fragile, and more expensive. Which brings us to what this shortage actually means for the wider war. Let's talk about it in our final chapter. Let's look at this from a different angle, because the fuel crisis does not mean that the Russian military will suddenly stop tomorrow, and every shortage should not become a prediction of immediate collapse. But it does show that one of Russia's most important advantages is no longer automatic. Ukraine has operated under severe constraints since the beginning of the invasion, dealing with shortages of money, ammunition, vehicles, and personnel for more than 4 years. While Russia began with much deeper reserves, sure, including abundant gasoline and diesel, Soviet-era ammunition depots, fleets of armored vehicles, and just in general greater pool of manpower. The expectation was that even if Russian command remained inefficient, the just simple mere scale of those reserves would allow it to absorb waste longer, that Ukraine could survive scarcity. And even though this advantage still matters, Ukraine has spent years attacking the points where Russian abundance becomes usable power, including once again depots, refineries and transport routes. The fuel shortages suggest that this strategy is creating an equalizing effect, not because Russia has run out of oil, but because more gasoline is being delayed, rationed, or stolen far from the units waiting for them. The Kremlin has tried to answer by rerouting national resources towards defense contractors, strategic regions, and military supply, but every additional priority pushes another group downward in the priority list until there is no painless category left to sacrifice. Eventually, the shortage moves into places that were supposed to remain protected. The political nature of this war also matters, because delivery depends on people who may not share Putin's urgency, including gasoline station workers enforcing limits, drivers unwilling to cross drone-covered roads, and civilians already paying higher prices while being asked to donate another 20 liters. The president can call the war historic, but, well, that does not automatically create loyalty, competence or courage across thousands of separate decisions. This does not require a mutiny or organized sabotage, because a weak system can fail through ordinary fear, corruption and self-interest. For years, Russia's advantage was not that its system worked well, but that it possessed enough money, fuel and people to survive how badly it worked. And now, Ukraine is forcing that system to operate with less room for waste. And when that margin disappears, inefficiency becomes way more visible in the most basic places, such as generator without gasoline, pickup truck missing from the official list, or a soldier who is forced to walk 10 kilometers towards a resupply point. Guys, please subscribe to the channel if you found today's breakdown useful, because there are many more important stories hidden behind the official headlines, and in future videos we will continue examining what is really happening inside Russia and how the war is changing the country. Thanks so much for watching, don't forget about the Patreon, the link is down below, see you on Friday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell, their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.